All right, I'll call this meeting to order. Can I please get a motion to confirm today's agenda? Moved by Bob Cook and seconded by, I think that was Nick on there. It's that the agenda for the Water and Wastewater Rates Community Committee meeting of November 6, 2020 be confirmed. All in favor? That carries. Section 3, disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Does anybody have anything to declare today? Seeing none. That brings us to 4.1, minutes from the previous meeting. Just a little housekeeping there. It should say the Water and Wastewater Rates Committee, not the Audit Committee. But can I get anybody have any questions or concerns from the minutes from the September meeting? Seeing none. So can I get a motion then to adopt those minutes, please? Councillor St. Jean, seconded by Ray, that the minutes from the Special Audit Committee meeting held September 17th be adopted as presented. Or sorry, the Water and Wastewater Rates Committee be adopted as presented. All those in favor? That carries. Announcements. Does anybody have any announcements they want to bring forward? Seeing none. So that'll move us into item 6.1, and we have Sean Michael Stephen from Watson's and Associates Economists Limited today to present to the committee regarding the Water and Wastewater Rate Study and Water Financial Plan. Welcome, Sean Michael. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone.
Pardon me, through the chair. Sean Michael, do you want to share your screen, or would you like me to display the presentation?
I can share it. I was just about to do that, if that's okay. Okay, so that should be sharing on your end now.
It is.
Great. Okay, so the intent for the presentation this morning is just to give the committee an overview of the study process and the key inputs into the water and wastewater rate study. And so the overall objective of the water and wastewater rate study is to inform full cost recovery water and wastewater rates and looking at over a 10-year forecast period. One of the other deliverables, though, as well, is to, as an output of the rate study, is to produce a water financial plan that meets the requirements of Ontario Regulation 45307, which is one of the mandatory submission requirements as part of the county's drinking water license renewal application that is due in June of next year. And that's part of the 5-year renewal.
Sean Michael, are you able to speak a little closer to the mic? I think we're having trouble hearing you on this end.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I can
Thanks.
try and speak up if that's helpful. So in terms of the rate setting approach, on the right side of this illustration, we have the high-level illustration of your water and wastewater rates. They're comprised of a fixed monthly base charge that varies by size of the water meter. So larger water meters that have a larger demand or capacity of the system available to them pay a higher monthly base charge than smaller meter sizes. And then we also have a consumptive rate, which is charged per cubic meter of water consumption each month. And that rate is currently structured with a higher consumptive rate during the summer months than during the winter months. And the intent of that was to try and promote water conservation in those summer months when residents have greater control over their water usage. And so that's the structure of the rates. In terms of how those rates are then calculated, we need to look at, firstly on the upper left-hand side in the red circle, what are those annual costs that are going to be recovered from the water and wastewater rates? And so we'll touch on those, what goes into those costs in a moment. And then as well as the rates are charged based on the number of customers and the volume of water consumption, we also need to understand how are those number of households and businesses going to change over the forecast period, and what is the anticipated water consumption that will occur. So in terms of the forecast connections and consumption, there's 4 main things we need to look at in that forecast. We'll look at the historical growth. We'll look at the growth study that's been undertaken for the county, as well as the development charge background study and the anticipated rates of growth therein, to reflect what do we think is a a reasonable forecast of growth for the purpose of the rate study. It's important to note that for the rate study, we're not bound to tie directly to the growth study or the development charge background study. What we want to reflect is a reasonable conservative rate of growth, so that we're not overstating the near-term growth, because if you are, then that can result in revenue shortfalls if you're designing rates around a greater level of water consumption or customers. And then we also need to understand what is the current demand of the existing systems from water and wastewater standpoint, and what do we think the future demand will be of those new connections. So looking at the average consumption per residential and non-residential connection, and how we think that might forecast out in terms of new connections to the system and the level of water that they will be consuming. So the other component then in that equation, the annual cost to be recovered, there's three main components to the cost that will be recovered from the water and wastewater rates annually. There's obviously the annual operating cost of the systems. And so there we're looking at the cost of the existing systems, how those will change over the forecast period with inflationary increases, as well as any new infrastructure that's constructed during that time period, in terms of new treatment plants, for example, and the additional operating costs to operate those plants. There's the debt financing costs related to the principal and interest payments of existing rate-supported debt, as well as any new rate-supported debt. And then there's also transfers to capital reserves for future asset replacement. And so the last two of those items are heavily influenced by the capital costs that are anticipated over the 10-year period and over the long term as well. So we can see on the bottom right-hand corner, the asset management plan, those long-term needs that are identified in the asset management plan that I'll touch on in a couple of slides are going to inform what those transfers to capital reserves are to meet the average annual long-term life cycle needs of the system. But the asset management plan, as well as the development charge background study, are also going to inform what are the actual capital needs over the 10-year period. As indicated in the upper right-hand side, are annual capital expenditures. Those annual capital expenditures have funding sources, so they're going to be funded through development charges for the growth-related component of those, debt, reserves, and then grants where those are available as well. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, to the extent there's any additional debt that's required to fund those capital needs from a rate-supported standpoint, those additional principal and interest costs will form part of the future years' costs need to be funded from the rates. And as well, the availability of reserves will be influenced by the iterative relationship of what are we transferring to those reserves annually for long-term needs, what's available in that year to fund the actual capital expenditures in that given year, and then if there's a shortfall, that's then where debt comes into play. So as we saw in the earlier slide, the development charges are a key component of the capital forecast. The background study is going to determine the share of the growth-related infrastructure costs that will be funded through development charge revenues or funded ultimately through water and wastewater rates. So three broad examples of capital projects that will occur over the forecast period. You've got projects which are purely just dealing with existing infrastructure, replacing that infrastructure or rehabilitating it. They don't have a growth-related component to that. Those are costs that would be funded from rates. We have other infrastructure projects that might be replacing an existing asset or addressing an existing deficiency, as well as providing additional capacity for growth and new development. Those types of projects are going to have both a rate-funded share of the cost as well as a development charge-funded share of the cost. And then we have other projects which are entirely new infrastructure to meet the demands of new development. So an example could be an expansion to a treatment plant or a new treatment plant altogether that is designed just to meet additional flows from new development. That would be a project that would be entirely growth-related and funded from development charges. I have noted here that when I refer to something that's entirely funded from development charges, that's the ultimate funding source in terms of its relationship to growth. When we're dealing with water and wastewater infrastructure, because that's often required in advance of when the growth will have occurred and the development charge revenues will have been collected, there may be interim funding needs to the county, such as relying on front-end finance assistance from developers, debt financing, or other interim funding sources from other rate or tax-supported funds in advance of development charges being collected. So the asset management plan is another key component of the input into the capital needs and the long-term life cycle needs of the system. So as you're aware, that the county owns and maintains a large network of infrastructure that helps deliver clean water and safely manage wastewater. This includes the treatment plants, the pumping stations, the water storage facilities. There's more than 150 kilometers of underground water and wastewater pipes as well. And these assets are going to require ongoing maintenance, monitoring, eventually major rehabilitation, upgrades, and replacements. And so the asset management plan is going to look at the available data, evaluate the age and condition of the individual assets to forecast what the renewal and replacement needs are over a forecast period, but as well as identifying those near-term capital requirements. It's also going to look at the funding requirement to sustainably manage these assets over the long term. So that's so in terms of the way that's going to be gone about, and this is similar to the asset management plan that was recently completed for the tax supported assets, so the roads, community facilities, the vehicles, and so forth. It'll look at a state of infrastructure summaries and overview of the water and wastewater asset portfolio, including the physical extent, replacement value, age and condition. It's going to develop a 10-year forecast in terms of projection of those rehabilitation and replacement needs. So those are those near-term actual capital needs that are anticipated. And then for the underground infrastructure, the county's continuing to use a decision support software called Predictor. And what that's going to help do is coordinate the water and wastewater underground upgrades with the road repairs, which is going to be beneficial in terms of the overall cost savings. So coordinating those infrastructure needs together will mean that you're not digging up a road twice, once to rehabilitate it and once a further time to replace infrastructure. Those are going to be coordinated at the same time, so ultimately having a lower cost to the county and also reducing disruption to residents as well. Okay, so then in terms of the rate recommendations themselves, so we started out looking at the current water and wastewater rates. Those are going to be updated to reflect the rates to fund the full operating and life cycle cost of the system. And it'll be done so in respect of the current rate structure, but also looking at alternative rate structures as well, if there's a desired feedback to look at alternative ways to recover those costs. And so doing so in a way that we can make sure that they're fair, objective, and affordable. So we want to make sure that there's an understanding of what costs are being recovered through these rates and the need to recover those costs, as well as there's a need to increase rates to fully fund the system costs, that we're doing so in such a way to not overly impact residents and businesses in the near term, phasing in those increases where possible. As I mentioned, making sure that the services are being provided on a self-sustaining basis, that there isn't a tax impact to providing the water and wastewater services, that the rates are promoting revenue stability as well. So that's where we have the fixed charge component of the rates as well as the variable component. So the fixed charge is the revenue stability component of that charge. And as well, the ease of administration is also an important concept. So there's rate structures that potentially could be examined. What we want to make sure that we can do is that's not overly burdensome on administration to impose, as well as the billing software has the capabilities to impose those rate structures as well. And so Lastly, a couple of the other deliverables. We'll look at the rate structures in comparison to the county's municipal comparators in terms of what that total cost of service is for typical residential customers, and also looking at those bill impacts by different customer types. So large and small water consumers within different types of residential households and businesses as well, to understand with the rate structure alternatives over the forecast period, how is that going to impact different types of households and businesses within the county. So in terms of the study process, so proceeding from the initiation, the two main inputs into those capital needs that we touched on today that need to be proceeded through are the asset management plan and finalizing the development charge background study. The asset management plan should be finalized by the end of this year or early into January. The hope is for the development charge background study to be at least finalized in draft form in January, and then finalized in the next couple of months, going through the statutory public process. And then the rate study will really commence in sort of greater force in the new year through January to May, with the financial plan being completed at the end of May, in advance of the drinking water license submission deadline, which is in early June. So just to note that the work plan does include two further touch points with this committee. What's initially been proposed is that there'll be one to look at some of the initial study inputs in terms of the capital costs and growth and so forth, and then one to review the draft findings prior to finalization of the study. But certainly open to the committee's feedback in terms of where they would like to have involvement as well. So that does conclude what I prepared in terms of providing you an overview roadmap of what to expect with the water and wastewater rate study and the key inputs and study process. Happy to answer any questions you have.
All right, thank you, Sean Michael. I'll look to the committee to see if there are any questions. Bob? You might have to use the mic beside you, Bob, if you... Yeah, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, looking back at the work that was done in the last rate study, and I'm looking at, there was a package, there were a number of packages. One of them was called Technical Appendices, and it's identified, there was one in August of 2021, and it's identified as version 3. So what I'm trying to get a sense of, first off, is that document, the technical appendix, sort of, is that the physical representation of the financial plan? First question.
I'd have to go and look at specifically what technical appendix you're referring to, but I'm assuming it's tables that lay out annual capital costs and
Yep.
debt requirements and operating costs and so forth.
Correct.
Yeah, so those are essentially the calculation tables that would inform the rate study itself, and so there'd be a physical rate study that would be a written document that would explain those calculations, the inputs and the findings. Those tables would be included as part of that. But then the water financial plan, that when I'm referring to that as part of the drinking water license submission, that's really an accounting conversion exercise to take the rate study information, which is prepared on a modified cash basis, and convert it to a full accrual basis, which is the requirement of the regulation, and it needs to be done for a 6-year period commencing the year the license would expire. So that would be a separate document from what you're referring.
Is the financial plan based on the projected rates?
Yes. Yes, the financial plan is an output of the rate study.
So when would this committee first see some theoretical rates?
The hope is that would occur in April or May.
Now, going back to this document that I referenced, it's labeled as version 3. Does it go through a number of iterations, or?
It can. It depends on the process and the feedback. So in that case, that was a technical appendix that was provided to the committee, but also to staff as well. That was as we went through the draft finding stages and looking at the various calculations. So what we would be, proceeding through this process for coming to the committee, we'd be first presenting that type of information to staff. There'd be feedback from staff throughout that process, but upon seeing the draft findings, that would then be revised. That would be brought forward to the committee. If there's any feedback that's requires any changes prior to finalization, then that's another iteration as well.
What possibilities are there for getting us some directional estimates of what the new rates would be earlier?
So it's possible. The main the main two sort of inputs that we're waiting on at the moment would be to commence the rate study in Greater Forest would be the asset management plan. So it is anticipated that will be wrapped up by the end of the year, if not early in January. And then the draft findings of the development charge background study, which at this point we're waiting on direction from the county around the plan for the future water and wastewater infrastructure needs. So that one item is really I'd say the one that, depending on the timing of that, the draft findings could be accelerated earlier than May. We could get to that point in March, for example, which would allow us to provide the committee some direction there. Which, if what you're thinking is, if we can get that direction earlier, that gives a little bit more time for iteration, possibly coming back with another version. I think that's possible.
Yeah, and also to understand sort of what sort of impact we're likely looking at in terms of ratepayers.
Right.
So there's two, at this point, there's two kind of black boxes that you don't have final information for. Is it feasible to make some assumptions about those and proceed with generating some rates?
It's feasible to make some assumptions on that front. I guess those would ultimately be updated as those other two studies are completed. So I think that's something we're open to doing if there's a desire to have that done within the study timeline, to advance some preliminary rates in advance of updating those with final information.
Given that, I feel there might be a motion coming there maybe. So I'll look to the rest of the committee to see if there's any other questions on the presentation. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think this question goes in the same direction that Bob was asking, and I appreciate the fact that there's been the work plan for the rate study includes 2 iterations or 2 points of contact with this committee. But I was just, and this maybe isn't a question for Sean Michael to answer, but perhaps for staff. I'm sort of looking for some input or some ideas. What this committee's involvement is going to be as part of that water rates process. And so, in other words, those 2 points of contact, those 2 additional meetings, will they be like working group meetings or just information exchange meetings? Because I think what our expectation, at least as a member of the group, is that it be more of a working group type of process where we can offer suggestions or ask questions to sort of, I'm going to say, challenge some of the assumptions that may be in the background studies. And so I'm kind of looking for some input in that, so we understand what our role is as community members on this committee, looking to help us and assist the process here.
Sure. I can attempt to answer that first, and if Aaron or any other staff members want to jump in, I'm happy to have the assistance. So the first touch point was certainly designed around what you're referring to in terms of being more of a working session to present. These are the main inputs that are being used in terms of the anticipated growth and the demand assumptions and the capital needs, so that we can take your feedback around that information and make any revisions that are deemed appropriate. So that was the intent of the first meeting, and doing that in advance of draft findings so that we can take that feedback before going too far down the process. And then similarly with the draft findings, having that in enough advance of when this needs to be finalized, so again we can work through the committee's feedback around how those inputs have now been used to formulate different rate structure alternatives, what the implications are of those different alternatives, and again take the committee's feedback on that, review that with staff, and then proceed from there.
Okay, Councillor Maynard.
Thank you. I have a few, but I'll start with, so our actual capital needs. I'm not sure when you really started working on this or how up to date, but I've got a kind of a bigger question on the elephant in the room, the economic uncertainty, and whether we need to, whether those have been considered, and reducing our projections based on probably funding sources and other world considerations outside of our control. I mean, we've already seen a decrease, so I'm just wondering how we, when we actually are trying to figure out our capital needs, how we calculate that into the new updated plan.
Yeah, good question. So I think it's important to sort of separate the two components of the capital needs. There's the one part that's going to be coming out of the asset management plan, which is dealing with the existing infrastructure. So that's going to be somewhat independent of and I think when you're referring to economic conditions, you're talking about the housing market. And so those needs in terms of your existing infrastructure and the need to maintain, rehabilitate that, those are going to exist whether you grow or not. And so those are needs that do need to be met. Then there's the other half, which is as you grow, there are demands for additional infrastructure from a treatment and distribution and supply standpoint. And so that's the part that the county is still working through in terms of what those needs are. And then there's going to be an initial plan around the anticipated pace of development and the timing of those needs. What the rate study then needs to be cognizant when formulating the rate study is when we look at the current economic climate, do we want to be more conservative around development in the near term when we look at the units that have been developed recently and that the county has in the approvals process? And if so, what are the implications for the infrastructure? So does that mean if we're using a more conservative growth forecast that infrastructure then gets pushed out slightly? So we definitely want to make sure that those different drivers are being considered in terms of what's the pace of growth that's being used for the rate study, and as well, what are the implications of that for the timing of infrastructure, and then for the funding sources as well. As I mentioned earlier, just because you're maybe undertaking an expansionary project for new development doesn't mean you'll have the funds from development charges when that project is completed, because it's likely needs to be done before the benefiting growth can occur.
Yeah, so more debt financing. The other one's maybe going to be the next one's a little easier. You talk about our municipal comparators. Who exactly are our municipal comparators?
So we'd be looking at that from two lenses. One is the geographic neighbors, so those in close proximity to you, but as well as layering in some other municipalities that may not be, within the geographic proximity, but are similar in terms of the geographic size of the municipality and the number of separate systems. So this is more relevant on the water side than on the wastewater side, but as you have a number of different smaller water systems, it's helpful to look at other municipalities that are similar in that way, as what we typically find is lower economies of scale with those other smaller water systems, and some municipalities that have multiple systems, including smaller systems, typically have higher rates.
Okay. I'll see if anybody else has any.
Okay.
More.
No. And Chris or Nick, do you have any questions?
No.
No? Okay. Back to you. Yeah.
Okay. So this may be a question to staff or to the consultant, where we have looked at where we now have the seasonal rate adjustments. Have we, or will we in this be considering whether that is actually doing what we intended it to do? Are we looking at our consumption rates in the summer and in the winter months to see whether that is actually doing what it was expected to do? Because I mean, there's it's a fair difference in the rates, and that's something that likely now is affecting our year-round residents more than we maybe anticipated. I'm just wondering if that's a part of the consideration in this rate study.
Yes, we'll be looking at that, and based on the available data and the level of detail in that data to assess that by month, we will be assessing the effectiveness of that, or the impact it has had.
Okay, and when we're looking at other municipalities or even looking in-house, I'd also like to see some more detail on area rating, which is common in some of our neighboring municipalities and is common in other areas, so that perhaps a look at whether we return to area rating, where the infrastructure, instead of having a across the board, where areas that are not going to particularly benefit. So to have a closer look at going back to an area rating model. Is that, because I think we see it in other municipalities, correct?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think it's very rare to see water and wastewater rates separate by jurisdiction.
Okay. And the last previous rate study. Okay, that's fine. Yep.
I'm just going to sneak one in before I go to Bob. Are we likely to see multiple different scenarios when we're looking at the rates? I know last time I believe there was different scenarios, but are we going to be seeing multiple different scenarios with rates going forward?
I think that the number of scenarios will depend on sort of kind of where the study leads us. So, for example, like typically what municipalities prefer to try and implement is if there is an increase in revenue needed over the forecast period, to do that in a fairly linear phased manner, so that you're not having big near-term jumps in your rates followed by lower later on, that you can have a 5% increase every year. That's preferable to a 20% increase and then lower rates thereafter. So the base scenario is likely to be current rate structure. How can we increase those rates in a linear fashion if there is an increase needed to meet those future costs? But then where some of the additional scenarios will come into it is, one, do we want to look at tweaks to the structure itself? So perhaps we want to, if we've looked at the higher summer rate and it's not having this desired impact in terms of moderating water consumption, we could look at a scenario without the higher summer rates. And then alternatives might also come into play, where if we're looking at that sort of linear rate increase, and that's creating some pinch points financially over that forecast period in terms of the reserves and debt utilization that's required, then we might look at alternative scenarios that have those higher near-term rate increases, so changes in terms of how we get to the ultimate end goal. But to say at this point specifically how many scenarios to be looking at, I think would be premature. We need to look at what the data starts to tell us and what alternatives make sense.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
Yeah, just a couple of follow-ups to those questions. In the past rate study, there were two primary scenarios, and I think they were driven by assumptions about how quickly we would move to life cycle funding. So one was by 2030, the other was by 2034. So that was scenario one was getting to full life cycle levels by 2030, and scenario two was getting to full life cycle by 2034. And then there was the current and the seasonal rates within that. Like following up on the question of comparators, there were, in the last rate study, there were 17 comparators. We were higher than all but one of them. And so I have a follow-up question would be, we talk about affordability as being a criteria. When we see that we're higher than everybody else, how do we define affordability?
Yeah, good question. So, so affordability here that I referred to earlier was in terms of how we can make sure if we are saying we don't want to have a tax-based funding impact, which has been the county's intention, as you have a large rural communities, is that these systems would be funded by the users of the system. And from an affordability standpoint, I think the costs are what they are. So how can we recover those in a way that we're not overly impacting one group versus another? So in one time period versus another. So again, how can we transition any increases in over a period of time? And that may be what you referred to earlier.
Master, I have mail for you.
That may be what you referred to earlier in terms of a longer runway to get to full life cycle costing. So pushing out some of that increase over a longer period of time. Another way would be, when there was a comment about the area rating. Well, if you move to area rating, what that's going to result in is rates that are probably unaffordable in some of your smaller water systems. And much greater than what they currently are now, because right now those are averaged across all areas. By definition, if you go to area rating, someone's going to pay more and someone's going to pay less. So you're going to have even higher rates in some areas. So that's another way affordability is considered.
I've seen some measures like affordability ratios online, where one that I found was affordability ratio, basic water and sewer services price divided by disposable income at the 20th percentile of household income. So an objective measure. Have you seen examples of that being applied anywhere?
I've seen similar sorts of examples, whether from a tax load or a tax and rate based municipal funding costs by household in other exercises. They're usually more of a benchmarking exercise and not they're not what drives the actual rates or costs themselves. Because again, if you have these systems in place, they do need to be operated and maintained for your residents and businesses. And so while the cost may be greater than what some other municipalities have, that doesn't then mean that the rates can be lower, because the costs still need to be funded. So I think those are still helpful in so much as understanding where you are in comparison to those sorts of ratios. And as well, when you make future decisions around infrastructure that is going to be maintained and the cost of that, understanding where that cost fits into your overall affordability of those rates, and that can help influence decisions that the county makes around future capital and operating costs of the infrastructure.
Okay, any further questions?
Yeah, I found my last one.
Yep, over to you.
Sorry, this one's brief on, what is it, page 7 of your report. The last bullet says annual bill impacts will be assessed by customer type. I think I know what that means, but for others, I just want to know, does that mean like residential versus commercial versus light industrial, or does it also include the supplier of the water? What does that bullet point, what's that catching?
So it's referring to the different types of water users within the county. So as you mentioned, residential versus non-residential users, as well as different types of residential users. So your large family, your empty nesters, your different profiles of residential water users as well.
So you mean like a breakdown even within the residential category? So how does that, like if you're paying per cubic meter of water, so now I've got another question. Why would we be concerned with the demographics of the household?
Well, because your rates are comprised of both a fixed monthly amount and a volumetric amount. So depending on the amount of the charge that's being recovered through the fixed amount versus the variable amount, that's going to impact different residential users differently. So if you two homes that are identical in terms of their meter sizes, but one never turns the tap on and one does, the one that uses more water is going to pay more. And so depending on how those rates increase, they're going to impact different types of residential homes differently. And so we want to understand that so that you're aware of the implications of the rate. So as a simple example, if the revenue increases were all on the back of the fixed monthly base charge, that's going to impact your low water users much more than is your high water users, because it's all on the fixed amount that they have no control over. Versus if your additional revenue is all being recovered through the variable rate, then that's going to impact those who use more water versus those who use less. Hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? No? Just quickly, I just want to circle back to, there seemed to be a hunger here for seeing something a little more tangible sooner. Just wondering, will we need a motion to make something like that happen, or?
Well, Mr. Chair, I mean, just listening to Sean Michael's plan, Watson's plan to come back to this committee, I was looking at our calendar. The next committee meeting is scheduled for January, and after that it's March. I don't know if we haven't coordinated with Sean Michael about specific dates for this to come back. But I'm wondering if either of those timeframes, we can work on the specific timeframes, might work with what Sean Michael is envisioning.
Yeah, just wondering if we could have something maybe preliminary at our January meeting to look at what might be. I think there's an appetite here to see that happen. So if we can make that happen, that would be good. Yeah, do you need a motion, or is that direction? You think that we can make that happen?
Well, through Mr. Chair, you could certainly make a motion. Are you asking, I guess, staff and the people from Watson's to coordinate this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically, yeah.
So it'd come back in January? Sure, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay.
I imagine it would be fair to just ask for Sean Michael's perspective on this, if this is a feasible thing that he and his team could be ready to come back in January with something.
We can, if that is the set meeting timeline, we can come back in January with the information we have available at that time. My concern would be that we wouldn't have as much information for that initial working session available for that meeting as we had initially planned to have a really productive discussion. So with the timing of the asset management plan development charge background study, the timing was to hopefully have those wrapped up by January. That's now starting to cut it fairly tight to say those are wrapped up. Now we're going to take that information, start to assess it for the rate study, and come to the committee in January. I have concerns that we would be able to do that. There'd be some information around growth and water demand that we could review, but it might not be the full breadth of what we had hoped to discuss in January, or at our first meeting, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we have the ability to call a special meeting in February, so maybe if that gives you a little more time, we could look into February maybe and just have some preliminary chat and a working session, if that's amenable to everybody.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, yeah, let's flip over to Bob for a motion.
Okay, so motion would be, it is therefore moved that county staff, with support of Watson, be directed to produce a forecast of water and wastewater rates for the period 2027-2031 based on current knowledge and with the understanding that such forecasts will be preliminary and subject to revision as the rate study process proceeds, but nevertheless will be helpful to the committee in fulfilling its responsibilities.
I think that's, Aaron, do you think that that's achievable?
Through the chair, it's probably more a question for Sean Michael. I know we had our first meeting regarding the asset management plan, and just to give a little bit of an update on that. So council has passed the asset management plan, tax-based. We have our funding envelope set for roads. The next stage is to move on to packaging the underground infrastructure with the funding envelope for roads from basically yesterday all the way through till the end of the year. So we should have all of that set in stone as a foundation for the wastewater rate study end of December. So that's sort of the AMP phase. And currently we are reviewing the growth forecast from Watson for this DC background study. It's about 60 pages long. Staff have commented on it. I've got to formulate that into a response back to Watson. And then probably February, we probably will have some preliminary data to work with, but I'll maybe leave it to Sean Michael on if there will be enough worthwhile to do a preliminary forecast.
Just a question, maybe I missed it in that resolution. Was there a timeline with that resolution?
Good point. I was assuming that it was for delivery in February whenever we set the meeting, but that should be added.
So, yeah, I think, given the wording of the resolution, that is doable. It will be subject to change, but I don't think that's an issue to produce that general forecast.
I see Director Kaz is here too. He's putting his hand up. So,
through the chair, I just wanted to highlight from a routine perspective, part of at least the last rate study is the work that the Water and Wastewater Department does for the existing long-range capital plan. A pivotal part of that is the outcomes of the DC background study. So I'm waiting for information to be able to fill in the aspects of the benefit to existing components from that study. Obviously, any of our existing infrastructure that's on the plan would be there and be looked at for at least the 10-year forecast. It's something that I normally provide. And then obviously the work on the operations side. So those really, along with the newer portion from the asset management plan, which already forms a very small portion of our capital plan anyways. It's just not specifically allocated to which underground works. So that's the piece we don't know yet in terms of how that's going to be impacted. So I just wanted to, in terms of the timeline, it's fairly reasonable to meet the timeline for the existing capital plan, but I'll need time once I get the results of the DC background study, which is all the growth-related capital projects, plants, that kind of stuff, and see how that will be impacted. So those are some of the components that I work on typically to provide into the rate study.
Okay. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Having listened to the discussion, at least for myself, it would be beneficial and would certainly help me out if I could review the asset management plan and the DC background study information ahead of the water rates, the initial water rates calculations, because there's a lot of assumptions and things included in those background studies that will feed into the water rates. And from my perspective, having an opportunity to review those, understand them ahead of the water rates, detailed water rates calculations might be beneficial. And it might be a good way to help ease the rest of the committee into the review of the water rates. If we start off with those reviewing those documents, understanding what those recommendations are and how they line up over a period of time, as just sort of a way to get some of the information flowing back into the committee here, so we can have a chance to understand it and be able to ask good questions going forward.
Okay. I guess procedurally here we have Bob put a motion out. I guess I should see if there's a seconder for that motion before we get too far down the road here. Is there a seconder for Bob's motion? Councillor St. Jean? Okay, so it's on the floor then. Any discussion on the motion, Councillor Maynard?
The question I'm going to go back to, so when we get this, and I would expect this to be a preliminary report, but at least give us some some context and where we're starting from. But I want to ask if a revised a revised growth study, will we be able to make any kind of projections? I mean, I know things like 6 months seems like an eternity, but I mean, I'm assuming the growth study we have is not based on current and projected world events, or what's going to happen in our community and the larger Canadian community. So would there be any chance to have at least some kind of look at the growth scenarios, because pretty crucial to our background study?
My understanding is that Watson made a presentation in May with some adjusted forecasts. The median growth rate in that, or the medium growth rate scenario in that, is 0.8% per year, which seems on the surface of it to be fairly moderate. And that also included housing unit projections. So.
Okay, we have the motions on the floor, so I'm gonna call the vote on that motion. All those in favor? And that carries. So then we'll go back to the main motion, that the presentation by Sean Michael, Stephen Watson, and Associates regarding the water and wastewater rate study and water financial plan be received. Can I get a mover and seconder, please? Ray, seconded by Bob. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Thanks, Sean Michael.
You're welcome.
So that brings us to comments from the audience. We have none pre-registered. I'll look to the audience. Seeing none. So we'll move into 8.1, but before we do that, we're just going to take a quick recess because we have Director Landstra is going to be joining us, and she just has to connect to the Zoom feed. So 5-minute recess.
You go out, sweetie? Come on. Come on.
Hi, Crystal, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, we're just in a short recess. We'll be back up in a moment.
Sure.
All right, I'll call this meeting back to order. So we're going to be looking at item 8.1, the proposed EV 800 water and wastewater capital allocation policy. And I see Director Landstra's here with us on screen. Do you have something to add before we go to questions, Crystal, or?
Through the chair to the committee, not really. We're just following through with direction from the last committee where the policy came forward that was requesting to see the edits and changes that were going to be going to committee of the whole with the policy. So we have made some changes. We did have comments that came in from committee members that were updated in the document. So we wanted to provide the track changes that gave a sense of where those changes are. And I understand the clean version also came through to the committee to see what the proposed final version would be. So any comments that did come from this committee have been included into the policy document. And mainly I'm here if you have any additional questions or additional comments that I can either take back, or if there's something I can answer, I will try my best.
Okay, thank you. I'll look to the committee for questions. Ray?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start off by saying that I did provide some comments to the clerk's office, and it looks like those were incorporated into the amended document, so thank you. But the question I have is just a clarification. The policy speaks to connection charges, and I'm seeking clarification on the county's policy as it relates to recovering water and wastewater costs from developers. Is the county using a development charges process or a connection charge process under the Municipal Act? I'm just looking for clarification there, because this policy, I believe, talks of connection charges, which my understanding is usually a bylaw enacted under the Municipal Act rather than a development charge under the Development Charges Act.
Through the chair, from what I understand currently, it's through connection charges through the Municipal Act, not through the DC Act for water and wastewater.
Dr. McNichol?
Through the chair to the committee, yes, Director Lance is right, but it's Wellington. We also have DCs, and we have connection charges under the Municipal Act for the others. So one's under the DC Act, the other's under the Municipal Act. And during the DC background study, we're looking at whether or not it makes sense to have everything DC related or everything connection charge related, looking at the pros and cons between the two. That's part of the study and the work that we're doing right now.
Okay, thank you. And I guess just as a follow-on, I guess the policy would need to be updated if the county migrates from a connection charge policy to development charges only.
Through the chair, I believe that it would need to be updated to reflect a different kind of regime, if that's the direction that we go. The report that has been drafted that will be released for the Committee of the Whole agenda does speak to the purpose that we are currently undertaking changes for this policy, and it's more to help us deal with kind of constrained capacity at this point in time. We do intend, once we have a clear picture of how we're moving forward with capacity for Prince Edward County, that we would undertake a larger review of the full policy, looking at kind of the whole way that we set this up in terms of policy, bylaw, application process, things like that. That would be a larger review that could follow this. So if we were to change from connection charges to more of a DC model, we could review at that time.
Okay, Councillor Maynard?
Thank you for clarification. It's page 2 of 5 of the report, and in our agenda, page 17, number 3, the scope policy applies to all properties within the urban boundary serviced areas and all properties outside the urban boundary connected to partial services. I will again ask that Rossmore, as an urban area, that we at least, because it is a urban area that as of now only has partial services. So just to acknowledge that we do have 3 urban boundaries.
See Crystal nodding her head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it's someday and sometime that when as a potential growth center that it will be considered for full services. I don't expect that in here, but I mean, without putting that in, it's that's really just a small correction.
Crystal, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, I'm not sure what the question was. Is the question whether we're identifying Rossmore as an urban center in this policy, or you?
It just under number 3, it just says a policy applies to all properties within the urban boundary serviced areas, and then in red it's and all properties outside of the urban boundary connected to partial services. So it just needs something in there to clarify that that Rossmore as an urban center is currently on partial services. It's just to indicate that Rossmore is indeed an urban area. The way it reads.
So through the chair, in the official plan, Rossmore is identified as one of our urban settlement areas. So it would be captured in this policy under urban boundary.
Okay, any other questions? Seeing none? Okay. So we have a motion here that the proposed EV 800 water and wastewater capital allocation policy be received. Can I please get a mover and seconder for that one? Moved by Councillor St. Jean, seconded by Ray. All those in favor? And that carries. Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you very much.
So that brings us to 8.2, the 2026 schedule of meetings. We have the schedule here. It looks like we're probably going to be adding a special meeting in February, but our next scheduled meeting is January 22nd to talk about regional water system preferred options. Is that still on track for that? Yeah.
Through the chair to the committee, that's the original kind of roadmap of committee topics that we've been following. Obviously, things kind of change depending on the direction of the committee. I will remind the committee this is there are 4 meetings currently scheduled. The February one will add a special meeting, but January, March, May, and July next year being the election year, so the committee terms will wind down towards the end of the year. So with the assistance of staff, I guess, be mindful of the timing.
Right.
Get as much in as we can.
So we might be able to cram a little more in a couple of meetings instead of stretching it out until the middle of the year, right?
I would rather.
Yeah, so maybe if staff are able, maybe we could condense them into, instead of having those 4, maybe into 2. Would that be possible? Yeah, I could see the water metering, bulk water rates, and then the sustainability alternatives kind of into one meeting.
Check.
Just because I feel like we're going to be getting quite late if we, especially if we're going to start to look at rates in the new year too, then we're kind of behind the 8 ball there.
Check.
I would suggest.
Councillor St. Jean?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to, I guess, number 12, climate change plan, that's just simply going to be an update for us. No, there shouldn't be any decision-making on our behalf. And so I guess I have to ask the question, is it necessary to be on our agenda? Is it just a nice to have when we have so much other serious work that we need to consider? And I know you're in charge of that, Aaron. That's why I'm looking at you.
Through the chair to members of the committee, the original intent, I was in charge of the climate action plan, and the original intent was to have really the asset management plan and the climate action plan passed by council roughly the same time, and then there was some staffing challenges over the last probably 6 months. So the climate action plan as it stands is sort of in limbo, we're just, I think the hope is to have it completed and integrated with the asset management plan maybe mid next year, 3rd quarter of next year. We're just trying to figure out who's going to take responsibility for the project and who has time, whether or not it goes to operations. So it may be a little bit premature based on that to we have accomplished quite a bit, and we do sort of have a draft, and we do have some appendices related to adaptation and mitigation. But it's certainly in a rough draft form, so it may be a little bit premature to have a discussion on the climate action plan at that time.
Okay, so that kind of opens up some agenda space and discussion space to help us deal with what I'll consider the far more pressing issues.
Yeah, Councillor Maynard. Oh, Director Piazza, yeah.
Through the chair. I believe the other item in there, the sustainability alternatives, was tied into plant designs. So I think that could likely, it depends when the committee would want to see that aspect of it. It may tie in with the regional water systems preferred options. If it depends, and I think that it was late in the timing of the agenda because that's when we would have been moving hypothetically through the design aspect. Because typically those sustainable alternatives and tied to climate change may not be the most economical alternatives in those designs, at least from my experience. So that's why they were going to be at that time. But we may be able to touch on that and merge that with the items that are being discussed in terms of the MSP that might be a feasible merging, as long as, we'll know more as we work into the beginning of the new year. We'll know more.
Okay, and then it seems to me maybe the user-based fees and charges, and then the water metering and bulk water rates kind of works as one agenda, like one item on an agenda too, so we could condense that into another meeting. Possibly.
Through the chair, yeah, I believe it depends in terms of the user-based fees and charges. The majority of the talk about that is going to be whether we keep the schedules in the back part of the current water and wastewater rate bylaw at that place, or if we move them into the annual review of fees and charges with many of the other corporate items. It just, by having them where they are, it means that they're stuck there pretty much for the 5-year period that the bylaw's in place. And we do see, based on market value, that a lot of those costs for replacement water meters and things like that. So that would probably be, and maybe the decision to talk about a few of the language changes in the bylaw itself. So it is quite feasible. I'll have to work with with my staff about the water meter technology work, because we weren't forecasting that for further on. Yep. But I do think that that's possible. The bulk water rates themselves, in terms of possible options, that it kind of works in hand, I believe, with Watson's, because that's something they look at, that along with septic charges and that stuff. So we'll work into when you guys start to see and we all get to see the initial work of the rates. So the bulk water rates might need to work into the same February time that Watson's is talking about preliminary work on, when we might have some dialogue on that. We'd have to make them aware of that. But I think I can merge the water metering and the user-based fees into the same meeting.
So, yeah, I guess we can leave that as direction then, just to kind of compress that meeting schedule as much as possible. Councillor Maynard? Yeah,
and my concern is too, right? Like we will, likely become lame duck council early in the fall next year. So to hand this over, kind of half finished to a new council and a new committee, as much as we can possibly, get this completed and hand over, at least a close to complete package, if not complete, because that transition, like you'll lose really from the time that we become lame duck until next spring, really. I mean, or the following spring, right? It takes that long, really, in my experience, right? Like they'll get sworn in December, but really you're not functioning wholly as a council until months after that. Would you agree, Councillor St. Jean, right? So as much as we can lay down for the next council, and as complete as we can make it in the time frame that we have. And if there's some things that are less contentious or less important, that we can maybe, those things maybe can shift, but to try and get the plan prepared for the new council, I would just encourage it, because it's going to be it'll be a challenge otherwise.
Councillor St. Jean?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Along that line, I know we've pretty much every meeting we've had, it's been about gathering information, and other than to receive reports, we as a committee haven't made any decisions. So I think that's part and parcel of this, that we have as much of the information before us, and we need to start making decisions if all of you are going to move forward, and Sean Michael as well, with a lot of the things that they need. So I guess my question to staff is, when will we be seeing printed motions on the agenda to help you, to give you direction from the committee to move things forward? I'm curious, because like I say, we've been gathering information, and that's all wonderful and it helps us. But at some point we have to start helping you by making decisions. Maybe you don't have to answer the question, but at least give me your thoughts.
Through the chair to members of the committee, I think February will be a great chance to start making decisions because we'll have the asset management portion done. We will have 100% of the DC background study. So you've got the rate-based, you've got the growth-related items, and I think things will start to come as a complete package at that point in time. And I think that's really where the rubber will hit the road. Will really be at that February meeting because you will have a lot of great data that we develop through decision support software, and we'll have a lot of great data from the growth-related items from the DC background study, and I think that will be a pretty solid, big meeting and discussion to make some decisions. So that's my anticipation.
Okay, that would be great, because I think, you know, and I've heard it not just from members of this committee, but members of council. So when are you guys going to start making decisions? And I've actually heard it from, I'll say, our acting CAO. It's time to start making decisions. So I'm looking forward to that. And then, yeah, all of the information, well, it's pretty heavy stuff. It's going to take us time to get through it, but we also realize that we have a short window that we actually need to start moving forward, again, to help you to do your job, not just us. Yeah.
Okay, I just have one more quick question. There's been some interest from some members of the committee to possibly go tour that Bayside treatment plant. Is that possible or no? The one that we toured earlier this year, just the modular plant?
Through to you, the chair. I don't really, I can reach out to my counterpart there. Normally that was done through development services and set through them.
Well, then we'll take it offline and I can reach out to them.
I have to put some thought into that.
Yep, sounds good. Okay, so that brings us to the motion then that the discussion regarding the Water and Wastewater Rates Community schedule of meetings be received, and that the 2026 Statutory and Advisory Board Committee meeting schedule be received. Can I get a mover and seconder, please? Bob, seconded by Councillor St. Jean. Put your hand up, thanks. All those in favor? And that carries. So next meeting's January 22nd, 2026. And then I just need a motion to adjourn. Oh, Bob? Yeah.
Two little things. We got a letter or an email from Tim Good to a group of us. I'm not sure what's kind of the standard drill about how we deal with things like that, at least to acknowledge it.
I'm wondering if maybe could we include it as a memo on a future agenda, maybe?
Yeah, we could include it as a correspondence item to be considered. I don't know if there's I don't know the context.
Just an acknowledgement, at least, I think. That's all I suggest.
Through the chair, if there was any discussion to warrant it, then that's fine. I would, of course, committee members all know, you shouldn't be conducting, you can receive emails, but any discussion about business of this committee needs to happen in this room,
So maybe it's best to include it on a future agenda, and then if there's discussion, we can discuss it at that time. Okay.
Second thing, I sent a list of questions, and so is that the proper procedure for raising those things? And
I think that was fine, and then staff can respond with their answers. We're not having discussion in the background. They're questions, and I think that that's fine to do it that way. It saves doing it on the floor in a meeting. So
okay, thank you.
Okay.
Hey,
right.
I have a question. Can anybody hear me? Is my mic working?
Yep.
Okay. I was trying to ask this while Crystal was presenting still. This is related to the water allocation policy. And I just wanted to get clarity on the question of, so it's basically a 3-year use it or lose it allocation for those who, at registration time. My question relates to, what about allocations that have already been made? In other words, which situation are we in? Are we in the situation that we're bound by contracts with those developers to honor the existing allocations in perpetuity? Or are we in a position to revoke those allocations in the case where the developer isn't actually putting shovels in the ground? So I'm not sure who to ask the question to, but that's what I want to clear up. Where do we stand with regards to existing allocations?
Yeah, maybe we can forward that question on to the Director of Development. We can send an email out after this meeting, Chris, and we can get you that answer directly.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Motion to adjourn, please. Yeah, so that this meeting now adjourn at 11:22 a.m. All those in favor? That carries. Thank you, everybody.